Hi, everybody. I'm Anthony Pastore. Welcome to UBS Trending. Thanks for joining us. So, according to my guests, the space economy is reaching an inflection point and is poised to grow significantly by the year 2040. Though there is some uncertainty around this theme, recent significant technological progress has certainly opened up more opportunities to commercialize space. So I want to get into that right now with my guests, Michelle Liberty and Nathaniel Gabriel. Thanks for joining me here in the studio. I love this theme because I was a kid growing up with science fiction, whether it was Star Trek, Star Wars, whatever you call it. But it's actually becoming a real reality. And Michelle, I know you and I have spoken about this. I think you wrote the original report back pre-pandemic, 2018, I think it was, where we initially talked about it. But I want to talk about the space theme itself, because you write, as I said in the intro, that the space theme itself, or space economy, is at an inflection point. What do you mean by that?
Sure, and thanks for having me. And it's a great question because there's been plenty of developments in the space economy over the last couple of years, from the advent of the first Space Force in 2019 to the first all-civilian flight. So lots going on, but in terms of the inflection point that we see, a couple of things that I would point to. Number one, really robust private sector funding. Some of the world's richest individuals are basically self-funding the research here, and that's of course very important for early stage industries. Second thing I would point to, though, are kind of one and the same, so I guess two things, but technological advancement along with cost decline that's come from that. Because some of the earliest rockets, the payload was costing about $100,000 per kilogram, where today it's closer to about $10,000, depending on the total size of the load. So that's a pretty significant decline, and that's allowed for more commercial opportunity, as you note.
Yeah, I imagine that because there's so much more frequency. I mean, if you look up in this, if we could all look up in the sky every day, there's thousands of satellites that are floating around the Earth. So they've been launched over many, many years. And since the advent of cable TV back in the the 70s, we've seen so many satellites go up. Which actually, Nathaniel, is a really interesting thing to think about and talk about with you as an industrial sector strategist and analyst. We know about satellites. They basically manage most of the communications that we take advantage of every day: telephone, radio, television, the internet, even military applications. So how do you envision satellite communications could possibly be used in the future?
Great, thanks, Anthony. Great to be here. You're absolutely right that satellites facilitate the world we live in today. That being said, we are not at the end. We're far from it. The new applications for satellites continue to demand more navigational data, more communications data. I think we generally all agree we're pretty far from fully autonomous passenger vehicles, but that is something that will require more navigational data. We might be a little closer to things like autonomous trucks, drones, urban air mobility, and actually in the agricultural space, some interesting things happening where you can see a situation in which you deploy an autonomous tractor to an area with no cell tower in range. A satellite could provide the data needed to facilitate that. So what we're seeing is a build out of these constellations of communication satellites. Small, low cost satellites orbiting close to the Earth, so you have high speed data communications. But also a lot of them, so we have full global coverage. And so that's really providing, it's facilitating a lot of the development that we're seeing. Both, to your point, both private and military entities are starting to move in that direction and invest there.
And with the military side of the story, and we look at satellites, we look at space for international security, how does that actually fit in with the theme of the space economy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, space has been a big topic since the space race. It continues to be a priority across the world, especially in military budgets. We here in the U.S. broke out the Space Force as it's an independent branch of the armed forces in 2019. The president's fiscal 2023 budget actually includes a 40% increase in the budget for the Space Force specifically. NATO has also prioritized this. They're developing space centers in Germany, in France, and have also made it a domain of the military. So, continues to be a key priority. We're seeing this come through in two main ways. One is also on the communications side. and the other relates more to missile defense, especially given the advent of hypersonic weapons, which has been a big topic. On the communications side, the U.S. Space Development Agency is doing a similar constellation of about 300 to 500 satellites, which will provide secure, high-speed military communication, both to soldiers around the world, but it also connects with the equipment, fighter jets and missile defense. The other thing is, through the end of the decade, we're having a number of launches of satellites to detect missile launches in the infrared spectrum. Ideally, these satellites would detect a missile launch, it would track the missile through its trajectory, and then in the end, it would send coordinates for interception. So, very important ways to keep us safe from space. And then with regard to the satellites themselves, obviously satellites in space are fairly vulnerable. It's very easy for any country to track satellites in space. It's very difficult to harden a satellite defensively given the high cost of bringing weight to orbit. And so, I think we'll need to see more development of things like cyber defense for the satellites specifically, and likely, much more focus in that area. A lot of that may be classified. We kind of see that come through in the classified portions of backlogs for defense contractors, but clearly a lot of progress happening there.
And on top of that, we just had NASA recently being able to destroy an asteroid in space. I mean, the footage of that was incredible. I don't know if everybody has seen that, but
I watched it live. It was incredible.
it was incredible. I mean, it was literally a direct hit. So you can see that how the technology has come so far, and the clarity of the camera that they had on that DART missile to destroy that asteroid was unreal. So there's so much more coming. And by the way, Michelle, I meant to say this at the beginning because I mentioned in my intro that you're expecting the growth of the space economy by 2040, but up to $1 trillion versus, I think, 380 billion or so in 2021. So really that inflection point, just looking at the numbers, and even, as you said, the cost of the payload from 100,000 to 10,000, it's significant differences in just a short amount of time. So I guess the follow-up question would be, what does the future of the space economy look like, and where are the opportunities for investors here?
Sure. So I think it's important, as investors to be realistic on some of these industries and at the high risks that are involved. And we call the new age space economy one of the highest risk, but potential high opportunity as well. But definitely one of the riskier aspects of the theme. And there are kind of two things that I will discuss here today, and the first being space tourism, because I think that's a little bit closer to fruition than the second thing I'll talk about in just a minute. But space tourism does have, they have paying customers signed up and ready to go, but it's definitely not a profitable industry yet, and the risks remain really high. We've seen constant delays, pushing things further out, and of course, all it will take is one potential failure that could really hit consumer confidence in this regard. So the risk of failure is still very high, but like I said, customers are signed up and ready to go, so that industry is certainly getting closer to fruition. We haven't seen anything to the point yet of like the hotel industry being relevant here. We haven't seen that quite yet, and many companies remain private, but definitely something that, like I said, is close to fruition. The second thing I'll point to is not exactly close to fruition, but space-based solar power is something that people have talked about for a long time, but it's essentially been seen as something that's basically science fiction up until more recent years, partially because of those cost declines that I spoke about. So not just for the cost of the launch, but also for something like solar power. If you think back 10, 20 years ago, both of those things were very expensive, and now economically, it looks a little more viable. It's still very much in the research stages, but we've seen a lot of renewed interest in this because space-based solar power would solve, the number one problem of solar here on Earth, which is consistency. Much closer to the sun, right? To put it very simply. Of course, again, a lot of risk remains here on if this will actually come to fruition. So this isn't something that we see as technically investable right now. It's still way too early to pick winners here, but it's something that's exciting. It's something we're watching very closely because, like I said, there's a lot of potential if it does come to fruition.
And think about the difference between when we first talked about space in 2018 to today. You know, another 4 years from now, we might actually have information on how they're going to get that solar energy from the orbit of Earth to the actual planet itself and not have to worry about weather, not have to worry about night. You know, you can't power up your house in the evening because there's no sun, especially if you're living, you know, not at the poles during 6 months of the year. So it's a really interesting concept. But obviously the space tourism idea is really exciting. Obviously it's for the very wealthy at this point, but you know, as technology advances and if there's safety and these flights get off without too much of a, of a problem, then we might see more of that, you know, and with technology advancement, again, it's just, you know, the sky literally is the limit. I did that on purpose. Okay. Thank you both for doing this. And I know there's more to the theme. I know there's more to talk about. And every day there's a new advancement in something. So looking forward to having you back.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony.
Good to see you. And Nathaniel, welcome to Trending.
Much
See you soon. And for more information for you, our audience, please visit our website at ubs.com/views. Lots of content up there from Nathaniel, Michelle, and the rest of the Chief Investment Office. Plus, you can follow UBS on social media platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of our content is up there. Plus, all of our past UBS Trending episodes can be found on demand on various channels, including the UBS YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions about your portfolio, make sure to speak with a financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. We hope you have a great day, everyone. And remember to keep your eyes on what's trending and keep looking up. See you soon.